Just before we dive into week 4 on Unstuck, if you will grab this little flyer card that came along with your bulletin, both campuses right now, if you'll just take a minute and look at this, I just want to mention to you that we have life groups. They operate in 2 seasons of every year. We do a fall season life group, we do a winter season life group, and we travel through an entire discipleship process called Foundations. Now, we're taking a breath from Foundations just for this season. As your pastor's been a little bit overwhelmed working towards us getting into our building and that kind of thing, we will pick that back up in the fall. But we did not want to stop doing life groups. So many of you find that so valuable. Many of you need to try it and get into it. And so what we have done is we have actually 3 options for you topically to get into a life group. So you now can choose a life group based on your geographic area. You can choose it based on which night works for you. Also, you can look at which of these topics might fit for you and become a part of that group for that period of time. And so there might be some shuffling around or some opening up on that, but I just wanted to point that out to you. And so as you look at this, even as you're looking at this at South Campus, we want you to know that you are welcome to make a decision that moves beyond geography. And so even if you're at our South Campus, but you see a certain study going on in the Mechanicsville area, we welcome you to sign up for that study, and vice versa. If you live down that way, you attend this campus, you're free to go and be a part of that. But we have sign-ups available for about the next 3 weeks. You can stop out at our Connect Center at either campus and fill out the information to be a part of that. And then the week before your study begins, you will get a phone call or a text message. You'll get communication from your life group leader that says, here's when we're starting, here's what you need to know, here's what we eat around here, bring some, whatever they want to tell you. And so, look, I just encourage you, if you have never tried it, and somebody's like, oh, wow, go to someone's house and do this, you ought to give it a try, and you will be amazed how much you enjoy it. And this I have learned. Once someone falls in love with life group, they never go back. Never go back. Once they become a part of it, like, you know what? They'll lay down on train tracks for each other. They become that close. And this may just be the way that you can tie in to this church like you never have before. So take a look at these. Sign up tonight. Take it with you. Sign up next week, whatever it takes, and become a part of a life group. There was a truck driver. He was minding his own business. He had a long route, but he was about halfway through. He was sitting at a diner that was one of his favorite. He was just eating dinner. It was late in the evening, still had a few more hours to go. Minding his own business, eating dinner. In walked 4 guys from the Hells Angels biker group. And they just started messing with this guy for no reason. They started, just kind of slapping around, pushing him around a bit. They were taking his food. And finally, they grabbed his iced tea, tipped it over, and poured it in the guy's lap. When they did this, that truck driver just stood up, got out his wallet, paid the bill to the waitress, gave her a generous tip, and just walked out the door without saying a word. A minute or 2 later, the one Hell's Angel said to the waitress, well, that truck driver wasn't much of a man now, was he? And she said, well, apparently he's not a very good truck driver either because he just ran over 4 motorcycles leaving the parking lot. And something inside of us just says, yeah, right? Revenge, sweet revenge. We love it. No one wants to go to a movie and get to the end and find out that the bad guy didn't get what he had coming to him just yet. The reality is this whole idea of getting even, of settling the score, is innately built into us because we are human. Unfortunately, it is innately built into us because we are fallen humans. And the very nature and aspect of us that cries out to get even, that says we want revenge, never leads to a world where people get even. It only leads to a world where troubles escalate. Because your opinion of what's getting even and the enemy's opinion of what getting even is never even. It only keeps ramping up. And so the innate desire to take revenge, to get even, to get back at someone who has done something to us, leads to family divides and split friendships, imploded businesses, gangs that slaughter, and even to wars that rage. This issue traces all the way back to our earliest forefathers. You actually can go all the way back to Genesis 4 and discover the message is that as sin grows, so does the escalation of revenge. There are the words there recorded of a man named Lamech. Look what it says in Genesis 4:23. He said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. This text was placed here in Scripture to illustrate for us the reality that sin was growing and it was spinning out of control. And so in a world full of a vengeful spirit, God gave to us, to his people in the Old Testament, something that has been misinterpreted in the past as a vengeful command, as a regulation for getting payback. It's the one that Jesus referred to in the passage that Pastor Shane read to you. He refers to it simply as, it's said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now here's the full passage that Jesus was referring to. It comes from Exodus. Look what it says. If there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. This regulation, this prescription from God is what's known as the lex talionis. It is the idea of this, that the punishment should fit the crime. Now, in a moment, we're going to move into the part of this sermon where I talk to you about a higher standard that Jesus set for us, a Christian ethic by which we would seek to live. And when we get there, you're going to discover this is how we get unstuck from a cycle of revenge and bitterness. But before I can ever get there, I have to explain to you that there is a classic misunderstanding of the lex talionis, of the passage that's on the screen for you today. And so let me help you re-understand or kind of reorient in your mind what really was going on here. So let me tell you 4 things about the lex talionis, about this passage from Exodus 21. The first is this: eye for an eye was meant to limit vengeance, not encourage it. The objective here is not to encourage a vengeful spirit. It was the idea that crime and punishment should be equal, not exceed it. We understand this concept very well in our world. We do not believe that we should have the same measure of punishment for someone who speeds as for someone who robs a bank. We get this concept. We get this idea way back from the lex talionis. It was to stem the natural human instinct of escalation that I just read you about from Lamech, that said, he wounded me, I'm going to kill him. You bring a knife at me, I'm coming back tomorrow with a gun at you. The idea was to reduce escalation. It was a form of restraint. Here's the second thing. Eye for an eye was carried out by judges and courts, not individuals. You need to understand this. It wasn't like if you went, to the town leaders and said, well, that guy did that to me, and they sided with you and said, yes, okay, well, you have a right to apply lex talionis at this point. It wasn't as if they said to you, okay, well, here's what he did, so you can go out and find him, and you're allowed 1 3-inch bruise and 2 pokes in the eye. No. They did not allow for vigilante justice in their system. They turned it over to the courts. Once again, let's update it today. We don't allow for vigilante justice in our system either. As much as some of us feel like if someone has hurt somebody, then we should be able to go out and hurt them. We know this, don't we? If someone is murdered and you go out and murder the murderer, you go to jail. Because you are not allowed to simply take upon yourself the law. Why? Because if we take it on ourselves, we will keep escalating. And so the lex talionis says, we take this out of your own individual right to do that, and we turn that over to the rulers and the leaders. Here's the third thing. An eye for an eye was almost never literally carried out. We discover in the additional writings as it goes forward, and as the Jews tell about how this all rolled out. What they did was they said, you know what, there's nothing to be gained if somebody inadvertently or on purpose takes someone else's eyesight from them, there's nothing to be gained in making that person blind. So what they would do is they would put a monetary value upon what happened. Were you disfigured? Did you lose a limb? Did they kill your cow and now you don't have the ability for income? What is it? And so they would say now that person who is guilty has to repay that which is lost. So if you lost your eyesight, we're going to set a value on what eyesight is worth. They would have to pay for things like possibly lost wages as a result of what had taken place, or a differential between what they'd be able to earn in the future because now they had been maimed compared to what they would have been able to earn had they still been fully healthy. They would have to pay back for what it was going to take to be doctored back to health. They would also have to pay if there was a sense of humiliation or loss or heartache or distress. Can I ask you, any of you know anything about our course today? Does that sound familiar at all? That's how we work. That's how we work in lawsuits. We say, you know what, there's a damage that's been done, so we're gonna prescribe what the damages are, and they have to be paid back. God's ideas are so ingenious way back when we've incorporated them into our legal system today. And so the third thing you need to know is that eye for an eye was almost never literally carried out, but it was prescribed. How do we equal this out? Here's the fourth and final thing. Eye for an eye was supplemented with shades of mercy. In other words, some people are like, okay, so the Old Testament was all eye for an eye people, right? Oh, no. You actually find that in the Old Testament, God prescribes, hey, let me start to move you beyond eye for an eye. You ever heard this passage? If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. And some of you are like, yeah, that's in the New Testament somewhere, isn't it? Yes, it is. But before it ever made the New Testament, it was in the book of Proverbs, which is where? In the Old Testament. This was something the wise teachers were teaching their people even while lex talionis existed. You get into the New Testament, and Paul says, here's an idea. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. What are those next four words? Say it with me. For it is written. Now, whenever someone from the New Testament says, for it is written, guess where they're looking? In the Old Testament. So he says, so this is written back in the Old Testament. It is mine to avenge. I will repay. And by the way, that mine and that I is reference to God, not you. For it's written that God says, I'll avenge it, I'll repay it. It's not up to you. And that passage, by the way, comes from Deuteronomy, right, where the law is being given and the people of God are operating by the law. So we see, it's not that the Old Testament and that lex talionis was encouraging us to be unreasonable or vengeful, but rather the law and the things that came from it were encouraging restraint, trying to keep us from being a people who in vengefulness and with a desire for revenge get stuck in a cycle that never pays good dividends for anyone. But now, let's go one better. Because Jesus quotes this, and in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus comes out and says, now, I want to talk to you today in this sermon, and he keeps using this expression again and again and again in the Sermon on the Mount. He would say, now you've heard it said, but I say to you. He does this again and again, countering how they thought about the Old Testament law, what they had come to about the Old Testament law. You've heard it said, but I say to you. So, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, you know what? You've heard it said, don't murder. And some of you think that all God is asking of you is don't ever get to the place where you actually pick up a knife and kill somebody, to where you actually do it. As long as you don't actually murder somebody, that's good enough. Jesus says, you've thought that that's all it meant. But I'm saying to you, what would happen if you began to live so in connection with the loving God of the universe that you began to let God cleanse the hateful thoughts out of your heart? It says, I'm not going to murder them because I would go to jail. But if I had a chance and wouldn't go to jail, Jesus says, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery. And I know you think that all that means is as long as you don't go through the technical act of committing adultery, that's okay. But Jesus says, what if I began to so renew your mind and how you were thinking that you began to move past the obsession with lustful thoughts about people? And you moved past just always focusing your mind that way and moved into a better ethic and a better way to live. Are you tracking with me today? Do you see what he was doing? This is what he was doing at the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, yeah, you're saying technically here's the law, but I'm saying to you, what if I write a law in your hearts? What if I lay out something for you that begins to set you free from bondage to just technically obeying these things, but still being caught up in all the mindset and the heart of them? And so then he comes to this passage and he says, now you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. You know there's a legal way you can even the score, but I want to show you a better way, particularly when it comes to relationships. I can help you get what? Say it with me. Unstuck. I can help you break the cycle of revenge and bitterness and hatred. He says, let me show you how to get a heart that pleases God. And, hear me, a heart that pleases God and revolutionizes how your relationships go. So here's what he says. You've heard an eye for an eye, but here's what I'm going to tell you. Do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. If these words don't challenge you today, you either weren't listening or you have no idea what they mean. Because you're about to get challenged in the next few minutes as we wrap up. Turn to someone next to you and say, oh, goody. We are about to let Jesus challenge us for a different kind of heart when it comes to revenge so that we can kill revenge instead of letting revenge kill us or kill someone else. You ready? Someone say they're ready. All right, good. Here we go. So let's look through. There's 4 of them here as well. Here's the first one. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, for years, people have used this passage to talk about concepts of pacifism and war and how violent should we be or not be. And listen, it is a valid discussion, and we could look at multiple passages in the Bible and discuss what should the role of pacifism be in the Church of Jesus Christ. We may disagree on some of that, but that's not what this is even about. So you're going to have to set that aside for some other passage because that is not what this is talking about. Believe it or not, when it talks about someone striking on a right cheek, this passage is not about someone being violent with you. You see that word there, strike? If someone strikes you, that word in Greek is rapizo. And the word rapizo does not mean to punch. Does anybody know what it means? It means to slap. It means to slap. What Jesus said here was not if someone's violent with you. He says if someone slaps you. But notice he says something here. He doesn't just say if someone slaps you. He says if someone slaps you on the what? Right cheek. Now, in that day and age, it was the same as this day and age. Most people were right-handed. Most people were right-handed. And the right hand is considered the hand of power. And so if you're going to reach out at someone, that's what you do. You do it with your right hand. So I want you to just kind of picture it. You can take your hand and put it in front of you today and think about it with me for a minute. If you were going to slap somebody and they're standing in front of you and you're right-handed and you're going to slap them on their right cheek, you got to, yeah, exactly. Either you got to contort your hand pretty weird to hit them with your palm. What do you got to do? You got to backhand them. Did you know in the Jewish culture, it is a tremendous insult to slap, but the insult is doubled to be slapped with the back of a hand. The idea here is, what do you do in life when someone insults you? What will you do when someone humiliates you, embarrasses you, speaks bad of you, gossips about you? Is unfair with you when someone, here it is, when someone backhands you in social media. When someone backhand tweets you. When someone calls you up on the phone. When someone texts you. When someone's with one of your friends and commits against you a grave insult intending to humiliate you. Look, here's the first thing I want you to know. It hurts. Come on, admit it today. No one likes to be gossiped about. No one likes something untrue about themselves to be out there. No one likes it when someone that we counted on to be good to us is harsh with us and backhands us with their words or with their actions. It hurts. We say, how in the world could I ever deal with something like that without just wanting to get back even? Well, the first answer to that question is, as a follower of Jesus Christ, look to his example. Jesus was insulted. He was mocked. Look at what he went through on the cross. Get this. The people that Jesus is dying for are walking by and spitting on him. You see, when we talk about the cross and Jesus being lifted up, we sometimes picture, and sometimes Hollywood, maybe for the cause of having it be more impressive cinematography-wise, will put these crosses up really high. But they didn't crucify people up real high. Just maybe up 8 inches or a foot up off the ground. That's all it takes to get them up off so they can't touch the ground. You see, that left them at a place where people could walk by and insult them and lean right into their face. And Jesus was spat on and he was mocked. And everything inside of us says, Jesus, go get in your truck and run over their motorcycles. Jesus, say something to them like, look, you can insult me now, but 3 days from now, I'm going to be resurrected, and I know where you live, and I'm coming for you. We kind of want him to do that. He's the king of the world, the ruler of all things, the one who gives his life for us. He just takes it. But you see, he was the one who said, somehow, figure out how to pay back good for evil. Somehow find an ethic inside that says, I know you want to settle the score. I know you think it's only fair to defend yourself. I know it's only natural to think they deserve for me to trash them back for how they trashed me. Don't I have the right to give it back to them? Yes, you do. Wouldn't it be more than fair if I said something bad about them for all the bad things they said about me? Of course it would be more than fair. And I told you this wasn't easy. And Jesus says, but the kingdom ethic, the going above and beyond, says I'll relinquish my rights. Nikita Khrushchev, one of the cruel rulers of the USSR, once said this, there are many things that Jesus said that I appreciate. But I'll tell you this, I don't believe in that turn the other cheek stuff. If someone does that to me, I will strike them so hard on the other cheek, I may knock their head off. And you know what? That might be the expected response from him. But maybe you better remember, he's a communist who didn't even believe there was a God. And we are followers of Jesus Christ who not only believe there is a God, but believe he makes a call on our lives to live as he has lived and to walk as he has walked. And I want you to amen it. And I want you to dare to let it sink in. Not easy to walk through today, but this is his call to us. Let God be our defense. Refuse to get into those life or death throwdowns of insults and defensiveness. Jesus goes on then with this. If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. All right, we've talked about emotions and insults. Now, what about financial dealings? You need to understand that the people that day wore clothing in 2 layers, a lot like we do, undergarments and outer garments, kind of like we do. The undergarment was called the tunic. The outer garment was called the cloak. Jesus says, you know what? They can sue you and take your tunic. Here's the way the law worked. If you owed somebody, they could sue you for your tunic. They could sue you for your undergarment. Even the poorest of people in that day usually had at least 2 tunics, the undergarment. At least they had 2. They could change them out. They sweat in them and wash them and that kind of thing. But the cloak, the outer garment, most of the people in that culture, as I've told you many times that were very poor, they only owned 1 cloak. And the law forbids someone to sue you for your cloak. You know why? Because it was the only one you had that was your covering by day. And not only your covering by day, but at night when you went to sleep, you took your cloak off and you laid it over yourself as your blanket. It's all you had to keep you warm. So the law, in mercy, said you can't sue for the cloak. You can only sue for the tunic. And Jesus says, if they sue you for your tunic, go ahead and tell them, hey, you know what? While you're at it, you might as well take my cloak as well. What's Jesus saying here? He's saying it is better to go above and beyond with those that we have economic differences with, misunderstandings about where the line is at the corners of our property, or who shouldn't have done this or who should have done that, or why that work did get done. We are better to err to the side of not fighting for all of our rights and ratcheting up the hostility. We are better to let it go than to demand everything be just as it's supposed to be. You might look at it this way. Jesus says, go past a mindset that says, fine, you get the absolute minimum from me. I'm going to do it because someone commanded me to do it, but don't ask for anything else. This is radical and sacrificial, but if you hear me, it'll transform our world. What if in your business dealings, you went over the top to be beyond fair? If there was a doubt, you gave someone the benefit of the doubt. Treated someone better than they deserved in the workplace. And if there was a conflict or a difference, you were generous enough to just trust God to meet your needs, even though you went above and beyond what you thought was owned. You know, we all have moments when we feel burned by someone, an employment deal, a business agreement, a misunderstanding with a neighbor, a dispute even inside of our extended family. And Jesus says, yeah, you might say, well, you know, if you line up what they really deserve, yep. But don't you realize that they did that? Yep. What a strange ethic. Wouldn't it be something for someone to say about you something? What a strange ethic these Christians have. They lose a lawsuit, but they give beyond. Or they don't even enter into a lawsuit when they could sue and win. And they just say, you know what? I'm just going to go beyond what's required of me. As we're building our larger facility over here, you can imagine that this creates a certain level of angst for neighbors. It's just the reality. Is they start going, well, yeah, how much traffic's going to be there? Wow, that looks like a big building, and how much noise you're going to make, and as everything gets bigger, what's that going to do to us? And so we've had neighbors that have come and asked us questions, and they've expressed concerns. And there are times when it felt to me like we've answered all the questions, but you know what? We met again and answered again. Question on property line, let's walk the property line again. You know, we had one set of neighbors, and this is in no way disparaging them, that say, you know, we're concerned about what kind of buffer is there when this huge building goes up? What kind of buffer is there? And so your building committee sat down and said, okay, what does the law require us? And we have our engineer come back and say, this is what the law requires us. And you know what? These people on our building committee said to me, hey, pastor, what if we go to our neighbors and say, here's what the law requires, but here's what we're going to put in above and beyond what the law requires? And that's what we did. We said to our neighbors, look, we need to have this many trees, but we're actually going to put in this many trees. The burn needs to be this wide. We're going to do this. You see, we could simply say, we're meeting the requirement of the law. You can gripe all you want. You can go meet with as many committees as you want, but we're obeying the law. And Jesus says, what if you had a heart and a mentality that said, you know, it's not about just the bare minimum with people. It's about saying, I'm not going to grab at every right that's mine. You see, sometimes in life, the question we ask ourselves is, what does the law require, or what does decency require? But what if the question today was, what does love require? What would say to our neighbors, we're not just hanging in there. We want you to know we love and care about you. Does that make sense? The bigger question is, what does love require? Kind of quiet in here, and we're only 2 out of 4. Come on, wait, there's more. Here's the third one. Let's read it together. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Now, here, he's speaking about something very specific. These people know exactly what he's saying, because these people were underneath the military control of the Romans, and built into the law by which they had to live was that the Romans had the right of conscription. They could commandeer, they could impress into service any one of the Jews that they wanted within a certain legal regimen. And one of those regimens were that Roman soldier could come through, find someone on the street, knock on the door, find him in his house and say, you know what? I need you to carry my armor and my backpack 1 mile. And you didn't have a choice. You could face severe consequences if you didn't do what the law was requiring of you. And so when Jesus says someone forces you, they conscript you, someone you don't even like makes you do something you don't want to do. So Jesus says, you know what? Your despised oppressor makes you do something. Well, here would be the way most of them would think about it. I'm going to walk a mile. I'll do this. No, I'll put your backpack on. But if you look in my eyes this whole mile, you'll see nothing but hate and disdain for you the whole mile. And you can't control how I think or how I look. All I'm required to do is carry it. It doesn't say I have to like it. And you know what else you could say? I know the length of my stride, and I'm counting steps. And I'm not going to give you an extra step. I know the last step that's a mile, and this person's thinking to himself, and when I get to that final step that's a mile, I'm going to drop that guy's backpack with the amount of flourish that I can get away with and still not face his sword. And that's how I'll go the mile. And Jesus says, no, you know what? If someone tells you to go a mile, go 2. This one is really hard, folks. This one is, how do we avoid a vengeful spirit when we feel like we're being taken advantage of? Oh. How do we avoid a mindset that ends up angry and bitter when we feel like something has added something to us that's beyond what we ought to have to do? I can't believe my boss added that to my plate. Everybody else around me gets all the cushy work. So guess what I'm going to do? I'll make those copies because he told me to or she told me to. But you know what? I'm going to make them, and I'm going to be grumpy while I make them. I'm going to slap things down just hard enough in the office so everybody knows I'm grumpy, but just not so hard that I don't have plausible deniability if someone comes to me and complains about me. Some of y'all are laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to do it. I shouldn't have to. This shouldn't be my job, so I'm just going to do it, but I'm going to do it with an attitude that smells just bad enough that everybody around will know, wow, man, can't believe he has to do that. I can't believe she has to do it. But Jesus says, what if rather you decided, man, I shouldn't have to do this, but since I do, I'm going to do it with a good attitude. I'm going to put a smile on my face. I'm going to whistle while I do this. I'm going to say, you know what? I do this out of love for God. And so I'm going to have an attitude that's commendable. Let me talk to every person in this room that has chores. If you don't come see me, I'll give you some. All right? Because y'all just have me. Years ago, I told you that parents say allowance, and sometimes they give it because a kid breathes. Don't give your kid money just because they breathe. Okay? God made them able to breathe. They aren't impressing you by doing it. Okay? So you ascribe things that they can do in order to earn that money. But let me just speak to all of you who have responsibilities in your home. There are going to be times when it feels like you got something extra. Why did mom line me up to vacuum? Didn't she realize it wasn't my day to vacuum? And you end up, and your mom goes, well, just do it anyhow. And now you're doing the extra. Can I tell you something? Vacuum with a joyous spirit. And here's why you need to vacuum with a joyous spirit, because you're going to have to vacuum either way. So you're going to spend that time. So how does it make your day? Come on, church, am I right? How does it make your day any better to vacuum grumpy than to vacuum happy? It would seem to me, just a theory, it would seem to me you actually have a better day if you vacuum happy for the next 15 minutes than if you vacuum grumpy. And all the parents said, amen. See what I'm saying? Makes sense, doesn't it? And here's the thing. Then he says, if you got to go 1 mile, smile the mile. And when you get to the end of mile 1, look and say, hey, by any chance, do you need me to go another? Oh. Let's go back to the workplace example. You get done photocopying, you can't believe that job got laid on you. What if you say to the boss, hey, someone's got to file these things anyhow. While I'm at it, do you want me to file them? Oh, my. Some of you are like, you never been in the workplace, have you? Oh, yes, I did. I worked for years out in the secular marketplace. I know what it feels like to feel like you're being taken advantage of at some point, but to still say, hey, you know what? Something's going to look different and feel different in this office. Why? Because there's a child of God working in this office. Doesn't that make sense? If they can't find that joy, that peace, that cooperative spirit, that whatever it takes to be helpful in your workplace, if they can't find it at your desk, where else would they hope to find it? So you finish vacuuming at home. You didn't even think you should have had to do it, but you did. Maybe you come and say to your mom, hey, is there anything else that you need me to do? Look. And the reason all of us today laugh at that and say, yeah, right, is simply because the reality of the matter is not that wouldn't be a better way to live, but it's simply an untried way that we don't try to live. If you think I'm bold, I'm not the one who wrote this. Jesus is the one who said it. And somehow, we can get unstuck from the cycle saying, well, I'll just do what I'm forced to do and not a bit more. And somehow, somewhere along the line, there's to be some Christians who say, God, help me to be the one person who changes the temperature in this place by how I serve. So let me tell you what happens. We have an expression for that. And you guess where we got it from? We got it from Jesus. Because when you have someone who's like that in your workplace, when you have someone like that in your family, who does this on your ball team or whatever, you say, well, that's the kind of person who is willing to, what do we say? Go the extra mile. Say it with me. Go the extra mile. And when you have someone that you say that about them, that is a very positive thing that you say about them. We never mockingly say go the extra mile about somebody. We mean it as a comment. That kind of person goes the extra mile. How many of you wouldn't love, next time you're applying for a job, to have a letter attached to your resume from your former boss that says, you know what, I'll tell you one thing about this employee, they go the extra mile. You would love to have that be said of you. And so Jesus is the one who lays it out. Now remember, just before I give you the last one, that sometimes we're willing to go the extra mile for someone we really like, at least. But in this illustration, they had to go the extra mile for a Roman soldier. They didn't even like them. Saying they didn't like them is the biggest understatement of the sermon. They despised them. What happens when someone you're not even that fond of suddenly has some kind of control or leverage in your life? And you say, I'll do that for you. Because let me repeat what I said to you a couple minutes ago. In the end, you will say, I do that out of love for Jesus and what he's done for me. Oh, here's the last one. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, this final one might cause you to scratch your head and say, well, I don't see how that would really work. And so you need to listen carefully for the next couple minutes. First of all, what this does not mean is all of you, when you leave church, ought to travel to Charlotte Hall or into Lexington Park and just start walking the streets until you've given away all the money you have, go empty out all your bank accounts, lend it to everybody you can, even if you never think you'll get it back, give it all away so that tomorrow you'll be able to say, well, I obeyed this law, I now have nothing, but I gave it all away, so I give to anyone and I lend to anyone. That's not what he means. Remember, Jesus is talking about a principle of the heart here, and you need to understand how people gave and lent in that day so you'll understand what Jesus is talking about. Just as you needed the concept of the soldier to understand the extra mile, you need to understand the concept of how lending went on to understand what Jesus is saying. People lent in 7-year cycles as per the law. And so what would happen is if you lent money to somebody, they owed you and they had to make payments to pay you back. But the way they kept things from getting to where one family would become completely wiped out and have no more property ownership, because they felt that all families ought to thrive and live, on forever and ever through the generations, is they said, okay, we play Monopoly for 6 years, but at the end of the 7th year, all the hotels and the houses and all the improvements, they all go back into the box and we start over again. Except they meant it in real life. So if you lent money at the end of 7 years, you had to forgive it. So what happened in that culture? Well, in year 1 of the 7, everybody's willing to lend. Anybody that need then, no problem. You could find someone who would lend you money. That's just being a smart banker. But you get along to year 4, year 5, year 6. No one wants to lend anybody any money. You know why? Because that loan is going to become a gift. And so what Jesus says is, you know what? We get into these years and famine comes or hardship comes or trouble comes or their sons die and they're struggling to figure out how to get, and they need somebody who will lend them money, someone who will come along and see their need and give to them. If your only thought is, what's in this for me? How does that honor God? God's got to move your heart so that you are willing to give and not turn away from the one who wants to borrow for you. Jesus is saying, with your money, as with your life, you got to get past the what's in it for me mentality. You see, that's fine for how banks operate. Every bank has to ask the question, what's in it for us, before they lend money. But we're not banks. We are people that God has blessed at some measure. And he says, all right, take stock of what God has done for you and then begin to say, okay, Spirit of God, how have you blessed me in a way that you're going to speak to me about blessing somebody else? And in such a way so that my thought isn't, okay, if I give that to them, what am I going to get? You see how that breaks the cycle of the normal looking out for ourselves and begins to look out for others? I want to just take a couple minutes today and review some of the things that I have learned over the years about having people come to me with needs. And I don't mean that people come to me and I, as the pastor, make decisions about, or have other people make decisions about what will go out of our love and action. I mean when Diane and I are aware of a need and try to decide what to do. I just want to share with you a couple things that I've learned that I just believe are wisdom. The first one is this. My wife and I have come to realize that it is always better to give than to lend. If it is at all possible, it is always better to give than to lend. And let me tell you why that is. Whenever you lend, there is a sense of contract that goes on between you. And there is always going to be a sense to which one is beholden to the other because one is in the status of lender and one is in the status of receiver. And if things get problematic and you're not getting paid back, it can easily become something that divides you. So when you are aware of a need, and God begins to speak to your heart. Remember, you can't go down to the street and meet them all. So God's going to speak to you, and God begins to speak to your heart. If you can, it is always better to give than to lend. Now, if there's a need and you feel compulsion from God to assist, but the level at which the need is beyond what reasonably you think you can fully give to, and you decide, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and lend. You need to lend with a heart that says, it is my hope that I will get it back. But if I don't, the world will not come to an end. This is vital because bitterness settles into our hearts if we lend and say, if I don't get it back, oh, are you in trouble? Bitterness settles in and divides us out from other people. It will be better for you not to lend than to lend at a level at which you'll say, I absolutely have got to have it back, and the world ends if I don't get it back. So you see, either way, whether you give or whether you lend, there is a mindset that says, I'm doing what God has asked me to do, and I'm looking out for them, not for me. That's how this has to work. In fact, Jesus said it another way. Luke recorded it this way. If you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting anything back from them. Then your reward will be great. Do you see that? Then your reward will be great. I want you to know something. When you give to someone else, you might think the reward is you see what they're able to do. Maybe they're able to put food on their table because you gave them money, or they're able to move into a different circumstance because you gave them money. No, he is talking about a reward that God sees what you did. Then your reward will be great. And you'll be sons of who? The Most High. So we're talking about a God thing going on here because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. You know, I put that old passage in my sermon. I was going, oh, yeah, there you go. We talk about rewards. We talk about really being sons of God. And then I got to those last few words and went, whoa, read those again. Because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Sometimes you're going to give to somebody. God told you to do it. And you're going to feel like they aren't even grateful. Sometimes God's going to call you to give to somebody, and you're going to be uncertain in the end if they really used all the wisdom they should have used. Man, I lent them, I gave them that money, and they were still stupid. I tried to help them, and they still didn't do the right things with it, and now they're in a mess again. And look. if you gave with the right heart and did all you could to help them down the path to do the right thing, the rest is in God's hands. You understand what I'm saying? And if you spend the rest of your life bitter because you lent them money and they didn't pay you back, or you gave them money and they weren't as wise with it as they should have been, even though you did your very best to help them, then you just get caught and you can't break the cycle because you're just mad and frustrated. And then you know what happens when you're mad and frustrated? You're not willing to do it for the next person. You see, you need to be free from that when you give. You need to not just say, what's in it for me, but you say, God, what have you called me to do? And as he calls you to do it, he will bless through it. Last thing I'm going to tell you about that is this. When Diane and I give to anybody, we say to them, you know what? When we give to anybody, we say, you know what? Here's all I ask of you. If you get through this difficult time, you get through this valley, and eventually God blesses you, and you get on the top of the mountain financially, and you are now able, would you pay it forward? And by the way, we never follow up with them and go, well, did you pay it forward? That is totally between them and God. I'm never going to look in and see what they did or didn't do. But we just simply say, hey, you know what? The whole reason we're able to give to you right now is because God has been so good to us. And so if you ever get to that place, just pay it forward. And the blessings just keep multiplying and rolling forward. See, folks, somewhere along the line of forgiving for insult, giving beyond what's expected, going the extra mile, letting God move our hearts even towards the wicked, we get unstuck from the lex talionis. We get to move beyond eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Beyond just, I'm going to do the minimum, I'm going to do what's fair and required, and you know what? We kill revenge. And it dies out of our lives. For 2 weeks, I've been asking myself, how do I close out this sermon? How do I wrap this up? And it wasn't until this afternoon, that this thought came to me. Is living by God's way, doing what Jesus said here, does that look like weakness or strength? Because let's be honest, at first glance, it really looks like weakness. I get slapped in the cheek and I don't slap him back. What kind of weakling does that? I got to go a mile, and then I'm like, okay, I'll go two. Yeah. At first look, it might feel like it's weakness, but I wrote it this way. See what you think. When you forgive instead of escalating, did that make you small? No, it's big people. Isn't it? It's big people who forgive instead of escalating. When you responded to an insult with kindness, does that show that you are emotionally feeble or emotionally mature? That shows maturity, doesn't it? Because anybody can respond to an insult with an insult. Anybody can do that. That sounds like strength to me. When you have a happy spirit, even while you feel like maybe I'm being taken advantage of, if you have a happy spirit, does it make your day better or worse? I already gave that one away, didn't I? It makes our day better. That's a show of strength. And when you gave, does that make you foolish? Or does that just indicate that perhaps you are grateful and generous, which are strength positions? I would present to you today that you can get unstuck and break the cycle of revenge and even Stephen in your life and get to where God moves you into a new place of strength because you have a mindset that honors God in your relationships with others. I want us to bow our heads together as we close.